Good afternoon to you all, and welcome to another edition of the Smart Grid Educational Series Seminar with a concurrent webinar. We are live here from sunny Southern California in Culver City, and the National Technical Systems, which does a lot of smart grid technology testing and certification, is hosting us graciously here in Culver City, and we are privileged to have with us folks from the Smart Utility Systems out of Chino Hills, California. They're going to be talking about mobile applications in the utility industry. We have been hearing a lot about mobile applications and the potential benefits from it. There are people who still think that there may be a lot of security issues with mobile applications, so they're taking a more conservative approach to adopting it. But as you will see in the presentation and here in the presentation today, there are several new economic and technological drivers for increasing the penetration of mobile applications and wireless technology in the electric sector to benefit the customer as well as the folks who are managing the infrastructure at utilities. So I would like to now take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Satish from Smart Utility Systems. I have sent you a short bio on Satish, so I'm sure you've had a chance to look at it. But Satish comes from a very good background in which he has worked in several different large corporations in different sectors, and he brings with him a vast experience in working with businesses and understanding what their needs are, and then coming up with solutions. So Smart Utility Systems is a vendor that provides solutions in a variety of areas for the electric sector, including mobile applications, including cybersecurity, and including asset management and asset tracking, as well as looking into large data, how to manage it and how to provide analytics around it. And we'll be hearing from Smart Utility Systems in subsequent months on those topics. So today we're going to focus on mobile applications for the utility industry, and I now welcome Mr. Satish to start the presentation. Satish?
Thanks for that introduction, Erfan. I also want to take a minute to introduce the other presenter of the day from Smart Utility Systems. We have Kris Brown. He's our Senior Vice President of Smart Grid Technologies and Solutions. Kris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank everyone for your time. I know we've seen entrance into the web conference here from as near as being local out here on the West Coast to overseas. I know we're all busy doing the job of sometimes more than one person, and we appreciate your dedication to joining the call, and we look forward to sharing some interesting information related to mobile solutions, utilities, and the smart grid.
Great. Thanks, Kris. So what we have here is an introduction to some of the challenges that utilities face and how we believe technology can help these utilities meet those challenges. And we're looking forward to an interactive session. Please feel free to post any questions through the chat that is available to you on WebEx. And we'll get started right now. So the presentation really is split across, three core areas that we'll address. Why do utilities need to change? What is the push for transformation here? Why mobility is one of the key enabling technologies there, and what this means for both the consumers as well as the utilities. So here's some interesting information that those in the industry probably know this, and a lot of the consumers certainly don't. This is one of the largest interconnected machines in the world. It is reliable. You know, you turn on the switch, you get electricity in most parts of the world. It is a highly reliable system most of the time. What is even more interesting is that last bullet, which is it is ranked as the most significant engineering achievement of the 20th century. It comes ahead of highways. It comes ahead of the internet. So those are two folks that have actually been integral to the success and the growth of electricity around the world, you know, within the U.S. and pretty much, again, wherever you throw on a switch. So the first of them, of course, is Edison, and then there is Tesla. But the other interesting observation, if you talk to a lot of engineers from within the industry, a lot of the executives in the industry, is that if either of these gentlemen actually walked into our world today, they really would not see much change in the infrastructure or in the systems that they set up back then, which pretty much leads us to the fact that the utility industry is transforming for almost the first time in about 130 years.
Let me back up, Satish. So one of the things we wanted to talk about today is as we start to focus on the customer and we start to focus on mobility, we need to understand a little bit about the utility history. And the reason for that is because once we kind of have a common understanding of where utilities came from, how they were initially designed, how they operate in the beginning days, you're going to see some parallels with how it works today. And the reality is that you're also going to see a transition in terms of the role that the traditional utility customer plays from over 130 years ago to the role that they're now playing. And to describe it in colors, it would be, you know, a difference between black and white, quite frankly. So to Satish's point here, we owe the traditional design of our electrical network, of course, to Thomas Edison. We also need to think about natural gas and water, because as we think about smart grid, most of us commonly think about moving electrons and putting them in the place that we need them the most. But the reality is that smart grid includes water, it includes natural gas. And not only do we need to focus on how do we produce it, how do we create enough supplies of all three, but we also need to think about how we consume it. There is not a single profile of a customer in terms of a one-size-fits-all. So as an example, a lot of times when we talk about demand response, for some people, they actually view it in terms of economics of the household. In other words, demand response is not going to be that significant for higher income households. But the reality is, if we try to separate the idea that, you know, there's a one common model for a customer, we start to think that, believe it or not, there are some very wealthy utility customers that are concerned about the environment. They're concerned about conservation, and they want to participate in demand response for those reasons. Not so much in terms of, you know, they expect to receive a $2 credit on their bill or a $2 check in the mail every month. So as we go through this presentation, our goal is to bring you from the very beginning days of a utility and bring you to today related to operations and the utility customer. One other note I would like to make is we tend to focus on electric utilities when we talk about smart grid. And on the technical side, we do that because, to be honest with you, it's very difficult to store large amounts of electricity compared to water and natural gas. It's very easy to store those two products. So in terms of, you know, how we manage the use of electricity, smart grid, quite frankly, will look at the electric utility industry as, if you will, the primary environment to solve the problems between supply and demand, to solve the problems related to offering a variety of services and products for all the reasons that we have as a consumer, which is I want to, quite frankly, pay less for anything that I buy because the economy, quite frankly, is not doing so well and my budget is constrained. Or, back to Satish's point, I want to make sure that every time I turn on my light switch that the power comes on. So I'm not restricted by voltage quality problems, as an example. So we'll start talking a little bit more in the next few slides related to smart grid and where the role of the customer plays related to mobility.
Thanks, Kris. So we've talked about what the utility means and how that industry has come up and evolved, and there's a ton of information available on the web certainly too, but what does it mean for a consumer to interact with their utility? So there's some history here. So in general, in the past, the way this started, utilities have simply, viewed customers as just points of demand. And like Kris said, he talked about gas and water. So, I mean, this all started with gas. You have a central location where something is produced, and then you find a means to pipe it to points of demand. And that's traditionally how utilities have always viewed their consumers. In most parts of the world, and in large parts of the U.S. certainly, a consumer really has no choice in terms of which utility they will use. I mean, other than moving homes to a different location or moving their factory or their place of business. So in general, the relationship has been one where, it is a fixed point of demand from a fixed vendor, which leads us to the fact that, these are basically, it's a numbers-driven game. I have X number of consumers demanding X amount of electricity at a certain given point in day or time, really not much focus on quality. The key thing in this industry within the utility sector really is reliability is the byword, and that more than anything else is the biggest focus for this industry, which leads to some unusual pressures for someone that is actually selling a service, in a sense that the focus is not as much on efficiency or was not as much on efficiency or on simply saving money. Really, the biggest focus really has been on reliability. And customers typically have always been viewed in the past as falling into, they're either small customers or large ones. The interaction or the touch point with the customers has not been really high. And most of us here, in this room and those of you, listening to us from across the web, it's really a good question to ask, how many times have we actually logged into our utility's website or actually looked at the inserts that come with the receipts, with the bills that the utilities send us. There's also the question of the concept of unlimited resources, that we can build as many facilities as we want, as many homes as we want in any part of the world, and in reality we expect electricity to be there when we throw on the switch. Kris, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I would like to mention, so the two key points related to this presentation and in terms of how we're evolving as an industry, the utilities industry, are really found in the bottom two sub-bullets here on this slide, which is number one, until the 1970s, at least here in the United States, there's always been a consumer perception related to our natural resources that, in fact, they were unlimited. And that's been, if you will, almost a genetic response in terms of how we live today. But what we're starting to realize, and I know other parts of the world saw this a lot earlier than we did here in the U.S., but the reality is that, in fact, many of our resources are not unlimited. The other thing is the engagement of the customer, right? One of the nice things about smart grid, whether we're talking about electric utilities, water, or gas, is the fact that it's based on innovation. It's based on transformation. And when we think about transformation, we're not only talking about the way the business functions is changing, but we're also talking about technology. And quite frankly, the folks here at NTS, they live this every day, where they're seeing old ideas being refreshed. They're seeing new entrants into the market where technology is providing something new in terms of a capability or a technique or a way of handling, as an example, we'll pick an easy one, security, cybersecurity, because I know we all worry about that on a daily basis. But the reality is that in the past, customers have never really been all that engaged with their utilities. And the reason for that is it goes back to the early days of the utility, where the behavior of the industry was simply, we produce something and we sell it for a price, and our customers are willing to buy that item. So it's a very simple supply and demand model, quite frankly. However, with technology innovation, with the evolution of, if you will, learning techniques and education today, you know, very young kids in elementary school today are being taught how to use computers. And that's significant, because what we have learned with the adoption of personal computers is people generally don't give those up once they learn them. They keep them. They buy the next model. They buy laptops. They buy variations of a personal computer. So one of the things we have to keep in mind as we move forward in this presentation is the role, if you will, of technology and how that's going to continue to evolve. And what that brings along with it is a interested customer, where they're wanting more information. They're wanting more interaction, and they want to be involved in the technology that provides them information. They want to be involved in the technology that allows them to engage with third-party providers to a utility company, or with the utility directly themselves, or we'll see this in the case of microgrids, quite frankly, is within their own microgrid community, as an example.
So all of which sort of leads us to the question, here is an industry that is over 100 years old, that is highly reliable, and does what it is supposed to do. So why this need for change? So one of the things we've been doing at Smart Utility Systems and working with utilities around the country and elsewhere, we've been trying to figure out what are the key drivers for the utilities in this process of transformation. So the first one really is the population is growing around the world, and certainly here in the U.S. They projected at a 27% increase over the next 20 years or more. This obviously leads to greater demand, and we'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. There's also the adoption of consumer electronics, which will continue to increase. And this means more devices, more appliances that actually need electricity, that continue to be charged, that always need to be up and running. There's also what I think is one of the biggest game changers in the industry, which is a set of third-party products that are coming in that actually can provide the same service, the same sort of solutions that a utility does. And Kris will talk to this further in the presentation. But the question then is, if the utilities are not adapting and providing their consumers what they need, there are other vendors, for almost the first time in the last 130 years, that can actually come in to fill that gap. There's also the question of aging and inadequate infrastructure. And the two are not the same. So the aging infrastructure, we again talked about the fact, again, over the last 130 years, not much has changed in terms of the equipment and a lot of the infrastructure. But also some of the newer infrastructure is not necessarily up to meeting the challenges of the future. And again, Kris can talk to this a little bit as we go further. And end of the day, there is also the question of there is a finite production capacity. The act of setting up a new power plant just to get the approvals and the licenses done is about a decade-long process. The normal estimate to set up a power plant is anywhere from 20 to 30 years. So that's the lead time that is required in this industry to actually meet demand as it grows. Kris, do you want to add to this?
I would just say that, you know, as we move forward now, we're going to start talking about specific mobile solutions. And we'll talk a little bit about barriers to adoption and, you know, what are some of the success stories in the industry and what are we seeing around customer engagement? What are we seeing around mobile workforce training, as an example, and even operational efficiencies? If I was to talk to this one particular slide, there's really two things that I would like to have you hang on to as a takeaway, and that is the population growth. So we're going to continue to grow as a population. And with that, we're also seeing that the adoption of consumer electronics also continues to grow. So it's almost an exponential problem we're trying to solve related to number of distributed devices. And these don't necessarily have to be smart grid devices, right? We can be talking about tablets and phones, et cetera. But the reality is that where we're moving today related to consumer information technology is down to the device level. And when we talk about devices, we'll be talking about capability and functionality and security, et cetera.
So this is one of the things that, again, we'll address in some greater detail as we go forward. But the key takeaway here is really the fact that if you focus on the graph on the right, to the left of that particular line that you see in 2009, that's how the demand has grown or dropped over the years. But in general, I mean, that has been the general trend. But there is a definite impact of technology on demand. And the idea is that consumers want this kind of technology in order to manage their demand, in order to manage their consumption. So this is really one of the basic drivers of this transformation this industry is going through, because it is not only what the utilities want to do, but it is also what the consumers want to accomplish going forward. And again, you know, in the course of the rest of this session, you know, we'll talk about some of those enabling technologies, one of the key ones being the mobile platform. And there's this. So in general, we talk about reliability. We talk about the fact that you throw on the a switch and you actually get power there. But there are these what you might call black swan incidents, these outliers, and they make us alive to the fact that while the reliability is high in normal times, the complaints actually start flowing in times that are not so normal. So pretty much every part of the country at one time or the other faces some kind of a natural disaster. And Sandy was an example. And there is, if you just go through the web and you Google utilities and the governors of New York and New Jersey, there are some interesting observations you find there about what they believe the utilities should have done or what they should be doing and the response from the utilities. And there is a lot to be said for the fact that we've all grown used to this fact that utilities deliver reliability. But there are times and there are occasions when the state of the infrastructure is brought out in stark contrast to our expectations. So as an example, one of the questions was, on what basis did a certain utility actually promise that power would be restored in a matter of 6 to 7 days? And as they dug deeper into the process by which they came up with that response, it really turns out that that was based on an experience that these utilities had about 4 years ago with another natural disaster. It really was not necessarily based on situation on the ground. It is just the scale of what happened was too big for the utilities to grapple at that particular point in time. So we don't want to say that this is really, incidents like Sandy should really drive decisions in transformation, but they certainly are a key factor going forward. That the valid question really is that if utilities must invest in infrastructure, if they are actually going through a transformation, consumers want to see the results of that in situations like these. Do you want to spend a minute here, Kris?
Yeah, I would like to highlight a small thing that we generally never talk about because we've just learned to rely on it or depend on it without giving it much thought, and that is reliability. Related to, natural disasters, of course, those are always very unfortunate events that occur. And a lot of times after, some sort of an event, the utilities show up in the press, and they show up generally for, not getting power restored. We'll take the case of Sandy as an example, or not controlling natural gas leaks as an example. And the problem is that we're so good as an industry with reliability that the minute that we take a hot shower in the morning and our water's not warm, all of a sudden that is just, for us, just a very negative event. We've learned to treat and understand utilities, whether they're gas, water, or electricity, as an experience. And so when we start thinking about mobile solutions and the utility and certainly customers, again, we find ourselves with managing an experience as an example. But in terms of what we can do related to technology, what we can do related to mobile solutions, how we continue to keep our reliability percentages very high is, this is not something that was solved 130 years ago and then put to rest. This is an everyday work activity for utilities. Integrities of lines, it doesn't matter if they're, hanging overhead from a structure or a telephone pole, or if it's a water line or a natural gas line. The reality is that managing those networks, if you will, in the future requires us to use mobile solutions. It requires us to have near real-time and real-time data that can be translated into relevant information, the information that's meaningful for the various stakeholders related to smart grid, quite frankly. And we know those stakeholders, right? There's too many for us to count on two hands, quite frankly. So it's how do we become, if you will, the right answer to everyone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's the challenge that I don't think will ever go away because quite simply, as I said in the very beginning, it's very difficult to store large amounts of electricity. And quite frankly, I don't think any one of us wants a large water tank in our backyard. We want to consume from that network on an on-demand basis, and we want that in an efficient manner, and of course at a lower cost. Thanks,
Kris. And the only other thing I may add to this is we talked about reliability. We also talked about these outlier incidents, but they also bring to focus the aspect of the regulatory requirements that utilities need to meet in terms of how quickly will they respond to an outage, how quickly should they keep their consumers informed of their ability to fix outages, and pretty much any number of things. It is a highly regulated industry, so that is yet another driver for transformation within the industry, which sort of segues to the concept of mobility. So we've really talked about utilities now, and we're now going to talk about mobile technology and at least the way it is familiar. So here's where, if we were all physically in this one room, I'd actually raise up my hand and actually show the smart device I had in my hand. And we're doing a webinar, so we're not going to advertise any single brand, but you all know what I'm talking about. We'd actually say, how many of you have one of these? It turns out that about, within the U.S., about 35% of Americans own a smartphone. The adoption rates are even higher as you sort of segment the population. What is even more interesting, if you look at the last two, I guess, folks just past high school, in colleges, or just coming out of colleges, the adoption rate is high. And not only that, as we actually go further, you will actually see the adoption is accelerating within that group. So the interesting question here is, if, for instance, on a very tactical basis, a utility has to communicate with their consumers, how best are they actually going to communicate? We've already talked about how many of us would actually see an insert in a bill that we get from a utility. How many of us are willing to log into a utility website to look at things? So if you consider all of those questions, I think the answer turned out to be more and more obvious. And over the next few slides, we'll talk a little bit more about why mobile is one of the critical components of a utilities transformation. So this is a pretty crowded slide, and I'm not going to walk you through every single graphic in there. And again, some of this is publicly available, and some of this we know intuitively. But I do want to point to a couple of interesting facts here. So on the graph on the left, we talked about accelerating adoption of mobile platforms, right? So that's the dark blue line you see, and that's actually curving upward much faster, and the growth is much stronger than anything else you see there. It's faster than cable television and certainly faster than PC. If you go to the graph on the bottom left, that's really the convergence where between smartphones and what they call feature phones. So the concept that you would actually buy a phone just to talk or text, that seems to be kind of passé at this point. Nobody wants to do just that, as you can also see from the table on the right. So here's the kinds of things people actually do with a smartphone. And somewhere in there is the ability to actually talk to someone. But the rest of this is taking photos and text messages and all of this. So this really leads to two interesting observations, I mean, that are relevant for our discussion here. We've talked often with a number of our customers about the utility customers. What if one of your consumers called in and said that I have a problem with my meter, and I think it's emitting smoke or it's burnt? And what if they could also take a photo of that meter and send it to you from their mobile device? Now, all of a sudden, that actually changes how your utility actually gets information from your consumers. You can actually see the device, you actually know what is going on, and you can potentially, it can impact who you dispatch with what equipment to fix what on the field. But the other aspect of this is also, if you as a utility want to communicate with your consumer, how best do you actually want to do this? If you communicated outage information, are you better off texting them or emailing them or sending them a picture saying that, here is your zip code and here is where we actually see outage? And tell us how best you would like to be informed when we fix this. Do you want to be texted, do you want to call, or do you simply want an email? But that's the general expectation. And if you go back one slide again, you want to talk about those folks at the bottom, right at the bottom. Those are either the current consumers of the utility, or those are the consumers in the next 5 to 10 years. They're not going to sit at a desktop and log into a website and look at their, their utility consumption. They're not going to go in there and look at, outage information. Besides the fact that if you don't have electricity, it is hard to sit at a desktop and go online and look at anything. And on top of that, they absolutely are not interested in receiving, a paper bill from the utility, much less any other kind of an insert. So again, this is one of the transformational technologies that we're seeing out there and that we believe that utilities need to harness even more as they go forward.
Satish, let me make a couple of points. So real quickly, all of this information, while it's on a slide, is relevant and is important and is certainly interesting. There's nothing like real-world examples. And here in Los Angeles this morning, I'll give you one. As I was watching the news, one of the news stations here ran a story, and it was about the city had just passed a policy that they were now going to be giving homeless people mobile phones, right? And that's very interesting. And the reason why I bring that up is because when we think, and I'm going to go back to the traditional utility model, when we think about utilities and how they have always operated, to get utilities to embrace something new, especially when it's a new piece of technology, especially when it requires new business processes, especially when there are customers that are involved, all of a sudden these things become complicated for utilities. In other words, there's an initial knee-jerk reaction of, but this is not what we do. We make something and we sell that. We don't need to be involved in mobility, as an example. And so, you know, what I saw this morning on the news was people, whether they want them or not, are getting cell phones, right, in the case of the homeless story that I saw. And I thought that was very interesting because at Smart Utility Systems, we do offer a mobile customer engagement solution. And one of the things that we hear from many utilities is, yes, while that's nice, it's not necessarily core to our business, and I've got other things to worry about. And that is a common, if you will, mindset. But the reality is we're here to talk about the utility of the future. And the utility of the future dictates that there's going to be even more technology deployed in the field that's going to be owned by the utility. It might be leased by the utility. It might be provided by a third party, as an example. But the point is that within the utility industry, we're going to continue to deploy distributed devices in the field. We're going to continue to upgrade or update our critical applications that run in the back office. We're going to continue to be asked for more and more information. We get this from the regulators, by the way, anyway, right? Help us understand why you need this rate increase. I want to see your facts. I want to see your trends. I want to see your data, right? We're getting the same thing when we talk to utility customers. Last year, I worked with close to 1,200 utility customers in the Midwest for one of my clients. And the interesting thing to know about this particular project was, you know, my scope of this project was to understand what this particular utility's customers, and these were residential and small business customers, was to understand what they wanted from their utility. And the idea is to draw a correlation between what these customers want and what the utility is planning to provide related to smart grid products and services. So part of this project required a little bit of education on my part to these customers because some of them had never heard of smart grid before. And they didn't really understand what it actually was even when they told me that they had heard of smart grid, as an example. But after we went through a number of homework assignments and we did some facilitated sessions and workshops, what we learned was what the customers actually wanted and how that compared to what the utility was planning to deliver were nowhere near the same. They were going in opposite directions. And the point I want to make here is really more about the customer and less about what the utility was planning to offer. When we think about customers, we think about how frequently they can change their mind and how frequently they can change their priorities. You know, when we think about moving electrons, right, to be honest, it's pretty simple. You know, moving electrons hasn't changed since the day we figured out how to actually move them, right? They move towards the least path of resistance. The reality of a customer is they can change what they want to do overnight. And there's really no behavioral explanation other than, you know what, this is what I want to do. So when we start talking about utilities and engaging with mobilities and with mobility solutions, and now we're talking about providing information over mobile platforms to customers, one of the hardest things utilities will have to figure out is what's really important to my customer and why do they want to know this type of information. And to be honest, to answer that question is not only for the benefit of the customer. There's actual utility benefits in understanding these things as an example. And I'll role play with you a little bit. So if a utility was to provide, if you will, restoration updates to a mobile device that a customer has in their hand, and again, this could be anything from a cell phone to a tablet, but the reality is that during some sort of a restoration activity, the utility would provide step-by-step progress, right? We have identified the problem. In other words, Satish sent us a picture of a burning meter. We know what the problem is. We actually can tell from the picture what make and model that meter is. So now I will not roll a crew truck that has the wrong skills, they have the wrong equipment, and they have the wrong tools. So in other words, and this is a little bit about our operational efficiency, but the reality is that you know almost precisely before you do anything what the problem is. And as we continue down that restoration, we look at things like a crew has been dispatched, a crew is en route, right? A crew is now on site, and we expect restoration within the hour. And then when this job is complete, right, the utility can communicate to the customer over their mobile device, right, for an event like yours. This is a model of our average response time, our average repair time, our average time to complete the entire process. And by the way, for your particular instance, this is how we compared to that model. Now, the reason why that's important is twofold. Number one, the customer starts to realize that their utility views them as a valuable customer. And the utility understands that customers want information, and they want to know the status of a repair. But it's also important for the utility because the utility can ask that customer to take a survey and submit it on their mobile device. So they don't have to call in. They don't have to go to a website. They don't have to look at their email and respond to an email survey. They can do it right on their mobile device. That information can get sent back to the utility, and let's just say we'll put it in a data warehouse. And your customer service group, right, they can mine that data. They can start to get real-time, real customer feedback in terms of, you know, the restoration of a particular challenge, right? So when we start thinking about mobile solutions, these are the kind of things we're going to be talking about. And that's, I don't want to get too far ahead of our slides, but the key point I want to say related to this slide is really to look at, when we look at the percentages on the right-hand side of the screen, is to think about all the ways people are using these smartphones or smart devices, if you will. You know, taking pictures, accessing the internet, right? These are all foundational pieces of technology that are required to make a mobile solution like the internet, to make a mobile solution possible. And by the way, about that data, what is the integrity of that data? How do I know I can trust that data? And how did that data arrive to me from my utility? You know, can I trust it? What were the points of interaction? Was there any human intervention with that data? So when we start thinking about mobile solutions, There are so many layers of technology that are involved. But to actually make mobile solutions work at the customer level, it's also about the information and making that information meaningful to the customer base. Okay, Satish.
So, I just want to end with this additional factoid about, what people use mobile applications, the mobile devices for. So there's an explosion of apps out there, and I want to say that since the time we put this together a couple of days ago, it's already probably dated, by at least a few percentage points. So the key takeaway again here is that people are doing more than using their phones to talk or to text. They're browsing, they are sending pictures, they're taking pictures and sending them, and certainly they're spending a lot of money. They're used to the concept of spending money on mobile applications. I want to actually turn this over to Kris now for the rest of the presentation. We're actually talking specifically about the mobile applications or the opportunity for a mobile platform for utilities.
Thank you, Satish. So I want to go back. This one slide is just designed to show, when we talk to customers, what are they telling us, right? So on one hand, at Smart Utility Systems, utility companies are our customers. They're our clients. Third-party providers of solutions to utilities are also our customers. And it's important for us to understand what is the end consumer, or in this case we call it the customer, what are they telling us about what they want from their utilities. And I highlighted the top three, the most important being saving money. And you have to remember that, when we're talking to consumers, about their utilities, they think about efficiency. They think about, okay, so if smart grid means we're going to change the way we do business and we're going to change our technology landscape, meaning we're going to be putting in new pieces of technology, or we're going to be enhancing our existing technology, the common customer interpretation of that is, well, then I should be able to get the same thing from you, but at a cheaper cost. And in many cases, that is true. And it's also false, and I want to explain both. So let me start with the false. So the reality is that smart grid is expensive. There are large investments that are being put in play to make our utility industry more operationally sound. We'd like to say that, we're so reliable that it's difficult to improve on our reliability, but the fact is we can. The fact is that we're going to be collecting information we've never had before. And we have the burden of, how do we use that to not only the utility's advantage, but to the customer's advantage as well. So when we think about, well, I just want to be able to save money, sometimes that's hard to understand when we think about the large investments that are going into smart grid. So the reality is that, saving money is not necessarily the right answer, and it's also not necessarily the wrong answer. There are ways to save money, quite frankly, with smart grid. And, we can take as an example a very typical customer that's got solar panels installed on their house. We've seen this so many times that, it's now become very common. But, when we think about solar power, a lot of us start to think about the technology involved, and we think about, batteries and maintenance, and all of a sudden, the burden of the technology seems just too complex. But there are implementations that don't require battery, and the only time, you can actually use your solar generation is when you're actually generating it. But I know people, I've talked with them, I have neighbors that fit that model. They have no interest in having batteries in their garage or at their house. But what they do is while they're away from work, their household, quite frankly, runs on the power that their solar panels create for them. And the number that I consistently hear is $70 a month. These customers are able to save $70 a month by, if you will, consuming power that's off the grid during the daytime. Now, you have to understand I'm a good old Texas boy, so we get a lot of sunshine in Texas, and some of my neighbors are the ones that, you know, give me these numbers as benchmarks. But a Midwest utility where we ask some of these questions, we got the same feedback. So there are opportunities for customers to save money. There are opportunities for the utility to save money. But at the same time, we have to go back and think about the investment. And the reality is I don't think anyone has a very solid understanding of how to balance that cost-benefit model. There's a million of them out there. And, you know, cost-benefit model, quite frankly, is almost like, you know, having an accountant where you can make the number almost be what you need it to be, quite frankly. But there are opportunities that customers want to save money. They also want to know how they can reduce their usage. You know, there's a lot of feedback we get even today where customers will play back an example to us and they say, you know, when I go buy a tank full of gasoline, I know exactly what I'm paying for when I buy it. With utilities, I have no idea on any given day, you know, how much I've spent, as an example. And this is one of the challenges, if you will, that smart grid looks like it will help us solve, is to understand, you know, what some of the budget numbers look like related to consumption. We're headed in the direction of real-time pricing. And so these are all positive things that, you know, customers want from their utilities. They want to be told information about saving money and finding ways to reduce their usage. And then lastly, and I was a little bit surprised about this, but of the 1,200 customers that I worked with in the Midwest, the third priority for them was they really felt committed to help their utility with outage restoration. And to be honest, I can tell you that I initially started that project thinking that I would find very little, you know, mutual goals between the two based on, you know, some of the feedback that I saw early. But the reality is that what we're learning is customers are very interested in outage restoration. They actually want to help utilities to be more efficient and to be productive. If we go on to the next slide, we have been surveying, we're now over 100,000 customers. These are not dedicated to any one utility. And we're asking customers, what kind of information do you want from your utility? These are the ones that pop up. And to be honest, you know, because we have a limited amount of time, we intentionally don't show the detail behind any one of these. But the reality is that there's so many things customers want behind each one of these boxes. You know, I'll just pick billing as an example, right? Customers are telling us, in terms of a mobile device, I want to be able to pay my bill now. I don't really care to know where the payment locations are. So, you know, when we think about what kind of information we're going to share with customers using mobile devices, this is one of those things where we really have to understand what's important to customers. Because, you know, I hate to say it, but I didn't like to see that one particular project that I had last year where I saw, you know, a very different mindset between what the utility was intending to provide and what the customers actually wanted in terms of value and in terms of services and products. So when we think about billing, just to go back to that, you know, there's some very common things come up, which is budget billing. Everyone wants to know, how am I doing now? You know, I'm in my 17th day of my billing period. What does that mean to my checkbook? because if I'm living on a budget, I need to understand how that's going to affect, if you will, the money that I have to live on, right? So information around billing, information around electric vehicles, that's an interesting one, because that one, unlike billing, is a model or a function that does not apply to everyone. But it's interesting to hear what even non-electric vehicle owners would want in terms of information. And I'll share with you a couple of those things. One of them is they want, unlike the billing location, they want to know where are the charging station locations. They want to see that on their device. The reason why is because the truth is they want to go to the mall and shop, and as they're leaving, instead of getting in the car and then trying to go find a charging station, as they're walking to their car, they want to look at their mobile device and figure out where are those pin drops. Where can I go to find a charging station? Another one is they want to make sure that if they're charging their car, they can look at their mobile device and they can see the integrity of the charge going on. In other words, is my charging event safe? Am I overheating between the charging station and the battery, or somewhere in between? And it was interesting to get that feedback because, you know, generally when we're asking people about their opinions of something, our perception is that they already own this, and we're interested in, as an owner of this thing, you know, what they would like. But electric vehicles is very interesting. I can tell you based on my research, and I know everyone wants to know this answer to this question, it's my opinion that unlike the past, I believe that electric vehicles will be successful as a launch, if you will, in the market. I don't think they're going to go away, unlike the past, I think, 4 attempts. So we've made a lot of progress with electric vehicles. Customers like them, whether they're hybrids or whether they're pure electrics. They like the idea that there is a robust dashboard that gives them information related to their vehicle. The other things I want to touch on related to these cubes is energy efficiency. One way that mobile devices can help utilities related to their energy efficiency program, and we hear this as a common theme from customers, is that when utilities offer a program or maybe even a plan, a rate plan as an example, it's difficult for the customers to know about these things that the utility is offering. And the mentality that we generally see is that a utility will post some sort of a notification on their website, right? They'll have a link to it. They may send an email with a link in it. But the reality is that the customer penetration of that information is not very effective. So one of the common things that we hear is customers are not getting the information that they need from their utility related to energy efficiency programs, related to energy conservation. One last thing is related to efficiency and conservation. We call it the green footprint. But we've had so many customers tell us, and part of it has to do with where we are. When we were up in the northeast of Canada, certainly here in sunny Southern California, one thing we commonly hear about is quote-unquote green. And there are customers that want to do business with retail shops and dry cleaning shops and restaurants, if you will. They want to know where they're going, that these businesses are concerned with their environmental impact. And they want to only do business with businesses that are also trying to be efficient with energy and also trying to be a little bit more environmentally friendly. So that was something that for us we found was interesting, because that was something we didn't necessarily anticipate. We knew it was out there, but we had no idea the popularity of that type of information. So on to the next slide. When we think about, you know, mobile solutions, when we think about, you know, the role of the utility, when we think about the role of the customers, we believe that it is a win for both sides. Now, that when requires changes, right? The utility will own the burden in many cases of the data. They'll own the burden of propagating that information from the data out into the public domain. And this public domain can involve customers, it can involve third parties or just business partners of the utility. And by the way, when we start thinking about mobile workforce, it'll involve the employees of the utility. So what we're seeing is that as mobility becomes a adopted consumer product, that utilities are now starting to take a look at it. The future of where we're headed with mobility as a utility product, it depends primarily on the security of the information and the relevance of the information. And we'll talk about this here in a second, but what I'm alluding to is the fact that for a successful mobile program, we have to understand that there's this model of bring your own device. In other words, a utility can't control what type of a mobile device that a customer buys, right? It could be a Windows tablet as an example. We're seeing that come out now. It can be an Apple product. It can be a cell phone. And so when we start thinking about what do we need as a technology for mobile solutions, we have to understand that there are various flavors, if you will, of mobile platform technologies. And when we build out a platform to share relevant information with customers and business partners and to the utilities themselves, we have to make sure that we are able to penetrate across all those different types of technology platforms. If we go on to the next slide, which is mobile and mobile workforce training. One thing I'd like to share with you today is an area that we are seeing a lot of utility activity around. And quite frankly, this isn't necessarily rocket science. As an example, we have a number of our utilities that are interested in moving to a mobile platform with their training. And they do that for several reasons. Number one, I'll give you a real-world client example, and I won't mention the client. But one of our clients is interested, and in fact, we're working with them today, to put 11 training courses onto a mobile platform. And when we did the ROI before we did any work, because part of this project was, is this financially going to be worth our investment? We can make, if you will, our employees and our field force adopt this. We can control that. But what does the financial model look like? So if I was to give you a couple of benchmarks, I would tell you this. For one training course, over a 3-year period, we're able to save that utility company just over $400,000. And if you look at the scope of this particular client and the scope of this training program, we're talking about 11 courses. Now, when you take $400,000, you multiply that over a 3-year period for 11 courses, you're almost at $7 million. Now, where do those benefits come from, or those financial benefits come from? And to answer that question, it's not a single source. We took, of course, into account the production, right? What do we pay in terms of paper and printing costs, right? Those are the easy ones. But when we also think about what does it take to conduct training, we also think about what about instructor time to drive to a facility, or the student's time to drive to a facility. If you conducted training over a mobile platform, sometimes you can reduce that drive time. And I'll give you an example of why this works in some situations very well. If you take where I live in Central Texas, and just imagine a snowstorm blows through, and it is on a work day, and we're having training on that day, I can promise you none of us would want to see a Texan driving in the snow. That's just not a very good thing to have. And the reality is that you can do the same amount of training over a mobile platform. And when I say mobile, I'm not talking actually about the desktop. I'm actually talking about a tablet in this case and a cell phone. So one thing we baked in, just to answer everyone's curiosity, is yes, we estimated the cost in this ROI to give every trainee a tablet. And we estimated the tablet cost to be $600. So we did a little bit of financial models behind this, and what we learned with this one particular utility is that not only did the financials look good, but also we learned that the students prefer various sources of technology integration in their training. I'll give you an example. What I mean by the technology integration is not necessarily how you deliver, if you will, a static document onto a mobile platform, but we're also talking about snippets of automation. So if you want to, if you will, play an animation of here's how you install this type of meter on a residential property, and we'll take you through, if you will, the 10 steps. You can see that animation, or you can see a real live video. And the convenience of that is you can go back and play it anytime. One thing that made this mobile training a success story for this particular utility is it had a direct impact on lowering the number of safety events that occur. And what we learned was the junior employees that were coming out of training, and you got to remember some of this training is very long, it's very comprehensive, and some of these training courses last up to 8 months. And what we found out was when these people get out in the field without their mobile device at their side, that they feel sometimes reluctant to ask a senior colleague, remind me again, what do I need to do when I'm doing X? And so we learned that these employees out in the field are taking these mobile devices and they can look up that reference material on the job site. So we've actually not only had an impact on the financial model, the budget, we had an impact on comprehension and learning, and we also had an impact on field services safety. So to give you a real world story as we continue to take that solution to market, we now are working with a number of utilities, and for them, they're learning that that's an attractive way to use a mobile device. A lot of times when we think of mobile and when we think of utilities and when we think of employees, we generally see mobile workforce management. And we don't often see, how things can be used from a mobile platform into other areas of the business, like training as an example. If we move on to the next slide, I mentioned this just briefly earlier, but we have to recognize that as we're delivering content over mobile platforms, that there's a wide range of mobile device types and vendors. And so for any mobile platform to be successful, we have to address all those types. So we call it, bring your own device as an example. We also took a look at, well, why couldn't we just do this over a desktop platform and over a website? And what we learned is that customers are telling us that they would much rather have information that is pushed to them, especially around notifications. We're learning that from the training that we're doing as well, and that is whenever there's a new update to a course module or a chapter, is that those trainees or now employees that are out in the field, they want to be made aware of, that there's an update to a particular manual. And we also learned that they want the ability to look up information. So how do I install, if you will, a Snyder Electric device? And they can look that up on their mobile platform. They don't necessarily have to go back to the utility facility to collect that information. And then the last thing that we really want to talk about today, and I wasn't sure, I knew we were here at NTS, but I wasn't really sure, of the audience, how many utility resources we were going to have on the call, how many non-utility resources we were going to have on the call. So we tried not to get too deep into the technology, but I do want to point out related to operational efficiencies for utilities, where they can find the greatest amount of value related to mobile solutions. And I listed them here. So one of them is distribution automation. And like the term smart grid, quite frankly, there's over 100 definitions as to what is distribution automation. But to keep it at the right level, if you will, of information for this particular meeting, think of it as millions of intelligent and distributed devices in the field that have the ability to allow your network, whether it's electric, water, or gas, to function at the maximum amount of efficiency. And if you can see the information from those devices collectively, and you can create, if you will, a work activity prior to any failure of equipment or prior to any congestion on the network, then really that's what distribution automation really is. And so again, we're back to these are mobile devices. They are installed in the field. They are managed, a lot of times by on-site field services people. They're managed by the operations of the utility. There are dashboards that can sit on top of this information. It allows the executives to go home at night, and during Monday Night Football, they can pick up their tablet and they can begin to see some of this dashboard information related to operations. And this is also true, by the way, for the smart metering or the AMI network. What are we seeing in terms of outage? One of the things that we hear about all the time, and we see this all the time, is, and we get asked this question by utilities very frequently, and that is, how do we confirm a false outage? How do we know that that smart meter is really sending us a true outage signal, or is it for some reason a corrupt signal from the meter? Or is there an intrusion on the network and someone is being a little bit mischievous with the operational integrity of our AMI or smart meter solution? So when we think about operational efficiencies of smart grid and a utility, to be honest, there are so many more than the two areas that I listed here. But what I wanted to do is call out the two that we're seeing today that are providing the most value for the utility.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kris. And at this point, what I'd like to do is have the people online start submitting their questions while we make a short introduction of smart utility systems and have our two speakers just say a word or two about themselves and their background, and then we'll get into the Q&A. So, Kris, you want to say something about smart utility systems and
Sure.
then your role in the organization?
All right, I will, Erfan. Thank you. So Smart Utility Systems is headquartered here in Southern California. We have offices in the central United States. We have offices on the East Coast. We have now just over 150 employees, where most of our resources are senior executives, where they come from a large history of utility experience across, by the way, the enterprise of a utility. So you can find generation and transmission and distribution and customer executives at Smart Utility Systems. Then there's people like me. I've got 18 years at the Big Four accounting firm consulting. The last 8 years every day has been smart metering and smart grid for me. And overall, our services that we provide is primarily in the utility industry. Most all of our clients are utilities themselves. However, there are some exceptions. We work with fuel cell companies today. They have a very interesting model. So storage is a trend that we see that's growing. Certainly, there's all kinds of technology things that we need to better understand about storage. But the reality is what we provide to our customers is software. We provide services. In some cases, we provide hardware as well. We look at customer engagement, mobile solutions. We look at, of course, utility mobile solutions. We are very deeply entrenched in what we call data analytics. We view that to be different than big data. You know, big data comes from the background of you've got to have some sort of large ERP, but the reality is that there's a lot of utilities today that that have data analytics questions and concerns and needs that don't involve ERP, as an example. We offer cybersecurity, and those are just a few, and I'll save a little bit left here for my colleague, Satish.
Thanks, Kris, and thanks, Erfan, for the opportunity. Again, my name is Satish. I work with solutions, delivery, and some of our strategic accounts at Smart Utility Systems. And again, Kris pretty much covered, you know, the range of our operations and what we do with a number of our utility customers around the country. So with that, I'll sort of turn this over to Erfan. I know you have a bunch of questions already lined up, so I'll
yes.
let you.
So before I get into the Q&A, I just wanted to talk about the company like Smart Utility Systems coming in and helping in specific areas and bringing their innovation. And this is a major shift in the way the utility industry is going to do business going forward, is that we have the large providers, we have implementers, we have product vendors, but there are gaps that need to be filled on a timely basis. And this is why it's so exciting to have startups and early stage companies coming in with that innovation. In many cases, as in the case of Smart Utility Systems, they're staffed with people who have that experience working in large companies, working with the utilities of different stripes. But having it in early stage company and bringing this technology allows us to leap forward quickly. And then eventually the market catches up with that innovation. So today you saw an attempt at breaking a mental model that if you really want to count on something, it's got to be wired. It has to be bolted down to your desk because that's the only way you're going to get that safety, reliability, and security. Well, we are showing as an example that if we don't stay relevant to the population and the culture that they carry, then we will be much like dinosaurs and we will be relegated to Jurassic Park. And the problem in a competitive environment and with deregulation is that we don't have the luxury of remaining fixed, remaining stoic, and not changing with the time, because we will lose market share. And that doesn't matter whether you are a utility, whether you're a product vendor, or if you're an integrator, no matter which stakeholder group you're in. So today was an attempt at talking about what innovation, what out-of-the-box thinking can do. This is an example. Now, through the course of the next several events, we're going to be talking about different aspects of mobility. For instance, cybersecurity comes to mind. A lot of people are very concerned that mobile things are inherently insecure because people have access to those devices, they can launch attacks from them, or there is the air in between and there can be man-in-the-middle type attacks. But all of these things are being analyzed through use cases, and proper analysis is being done at each of the layers of the Gridwise Architecture Council stack to identify what are the security requirements and then put the appropriate security controls in place. So with that background, what I'd like to do is ask Kris a couple of questions.
Sure.
One is that how much traction are you really getting from the utilities for a mobile platform? I mean, you talked a good game, but tell us what the reality is out there in terms of how excited people are in this sector.
Okay, and that's a great question, Erfan, because understanding the market as a solution provider is always paramount to our success. And the way I would answer your question is that we have to look at the utilities in several ways. We have some early adopters, as an example. And these utilities are utilities that now understand that the world is possibly going to change for them in terms of how they have traditionally done business. And we do have several early adopter smart metering and smart grid clients. I can tell you one of the largest in the U.S. is one of our clients with over 5 million meters, where we're delivering mobile solutions today. So, you know, when we think about, is this all pie in the sky? Or is this just visionary, and the reality is that 2 years or 5 years from now, this will now become adopted? The answer is partly yes, because it's like smart grid. We don't know everything that we are going to know today over the next 2 or 3 years. In other words, we continue to learn. We continue to create and define new capabilities. We have, going back to our host here, we have labs that are able to test software and hardware as these things get introduced into the market. There are some clients, another one of ours, is not an early adopter. And for them, they've taken the position of, I want to see examples of several years of smart metering and smart grid, and I want to be able to, on my own timeline, decide when I want to enter that market, at what degree, and at what pace. And so, to be honest, we have clients at SUS that are on both sides of that spectrum, early adopters and, the not so early adopters. But in the end, the problems that we're trying to solve with all of our utility customers is essentially the same. And that is that it's difficult for us to predict what the future is going to be 5 and 10 years from today related to technology. What we need to know is, how are we positioned to use that technology as that technology begins to infiltrate, if you will, the utility industry.
So let's say that some of the people in the audience are working for utilities, and some of them are helping utilities implement technologies. How would you guide, or what advice would you give to these people if they are interested in mobile platforms? How should they get started? What resources should they go to? Give us some guidance.
Okay. A common question that we hear a lot is, how do I even get started? And that's unfortunately not an answer that is applicable or relevant to all utilities. But I'll give you a couple of client examples, and maybe I can sprinkle in just a little bit based on my own experience. But number one is when we look at the customer as a stakeholder, for many of our utilities, we're talking about, more than 500,000 as an example. And this can be electric, water, or gas. And when we start thinking about mobile devices, that's a lot of devices in the field. And, as we talk to our clients about what the future of mobile means, one of those things is, we call it customer engagement. In other words, it's not one-sided communication. But as you're deploying a mobile device, my recommendation to any utility would be, number one, understand that the information that you put into the public domain is going to be information you will be judged by. So if we start to show, as an example, outage maps, and the information is not very accurate, all of a sudden what you have created for yourself is a PR challenge. right? The customers will begin to dispute the accuracy of your knowledge and the accuracy of your information. So the first thing we have to understand about mobile is that your success depends on the validity of the information that you're sharing. The second thing is that, you know, it's almost like AMI. The first step with AMI was, once you got the meter to work, is you had to address billing, because billing was what you were measured on, and you could be penalized for inaccuracy of billing. With mobile solutions, it's almost, if you will, the same step scenario, which is conquer that one-way communication first. Conquer the notifications and conquer the push related to relevant information to your customer. As a next significant step is figure out now how to attract feedback from your customer. Invite them to interact with you, and when you do, I want to say that one of the most compelling ways to invite a customer is give them options. In other words, ask your customer, how would you like to be communicated to? Would you like text messages? Would you like a phone call? Would you like an email? Would you like information that we place on our Facebook page as an example? Would you like a Twitter comment? And then ask for that back. How would you like to communicate back to us? So when we think about mobile solutions and how to penetrate that market with our customer base, it is paramount to our success as a utility industry that we are cautious related to the data, and we're cautious related to the information. Because unfortunately, we can't control what customers think or say about us in the press. And so we have to always come across with the idea that someone can interrogate our data and corrupt the message we're trying to send out, or vice versa. We could be sent corrupt data, not necessarily by our customer, but from someone that is intruding our network with our customer.
The next question is on the Green Button Initiative. Department of Energy and various entities have participated in this effort. What can mobile platforms do to accelerate the adoption of the Green Button Initiative?
That's a great question. To give you just a little bit of history with SUS, since we asked the question of who is SUS, we are involved in Green Button. We are a participant. One of the interesting things when we saw Green Button launch a couple of years ago, actually it was almost 2 years ago, was the idea was, let's collect information from vendors of the utility industry and utilities themselves and come up with what we think the customer wants in terms of information. And that's a great approach, because you have to start somewhere. As a next step for Green Button, though, one of the things I would like to see is, of course, more customer interaction. Let's engage those customers and find out what is it that they want. And now we've got, if you will, an example of my project from a year ago where you've got two sources of information, because one thing I see with Green Button is we're not always aligned in terms of what's important related to information. And very quickly, you know, I saw, and this goes back over a year ago, some of the initial comments about what we should offer in terms of Green Button was extremely relevant. And some of the examples, you know, I kind of thought, well, I haven't had a customer yet tell me that they want this. So I think for Green Button, it was the right thing to do, because it moved the utility forward in terms of understanding what relevant and significant information that we think utilities may want. And as a next step, I think we need to integrate a little bit tighter with the customer community, and in some cases, you know, maybe even co-develop, you know, what some of these apps look like. I know the White House, in fact, we talk to the White House very regularly related to customer communication. And of course, that activity picked up after Sandy. But the reality is that, you know, the White House is moving in the right direction in terms of finding one of those niche areas where a lot of value can be created for the utility and the customer base. And it doesn't really take too much, if you will, to start to show value. So I think those of us that are involved in Green Button are of the mindset that it is a valuable experience. It is a needed solution in the utility industry, and I think as more and more utilities move forward with understanding their customers, that we're going to see Green Button continue to be part of a smart grid solution.
Thanks, Kris. We'll just take a couple more minutes for one or two more questions, and then we'll have our closing remarks. One thing that is under all of this presentation and all the presentations that have been going on in Smart Grid Educational Series is a commitment to standards. And we need standards in order to have interoperability and not have single vendor lock-in. And this is something that is very important for the utility industry because as a regulated industry, they have to keep a level playing field. They cannot just lock in with one vendor and create a barrier for others. In that competitive environment, innovation thrives, and then you get the best solutions out there implemented. So that's a very good reason why the utility industry needs to be ahead of the pack when it comes to mobile platforms. Because if they're not, then the market will decide what standards they're going to have that are implemented, and many of them may not be friendly to their business model. So it's really important for utilities to study their business model and come up with the requirements which can then go into the request for proposals, which then go out to the vendors, so that when the vendors are meeting those requirements, they're also following those open standards. And this is going to be very, very important, especially when the IT and the OT side of the business needs to converge in order for a mobile platform to really work. And through Kris and Satish's presentation, they didn't get into those technical details, but that's really what it is. Sometimes they're on the OT side, sometimes they're on the IT side, and the mobile platform is this integrating medium. And so there, the need for standards so that there would be interoperability is critical. One final question I have for you, Kris, is this idea that in survey after survey, customers don't necessarily rank the websites of utilities as very well frequented or very sexy or ones that they would like to spend a lot of time. What makes you think that mobile applications from utilities are going to have traction with customers who may actually prefer to go to an entertainment site? So how can we make mobile applications for utilities appealing to our customers?
Man, that is such a great question, simply because we're still learning the answer to that question today. I mentioned the significance of having accurate information. Can we trust this information? How relevant is this information to me? One of the challenges with the website, quite frankly, is that we all are living very busy lives. And one thing we don't like to do, and we're learning this through, talking to so many utility customers, is we don't necessarily like to go get information ourselves. And a lot of it has to do with, we may hear about, as an example, a rebate coupon from our utility that gives you $200 off on a energy efficiency or an energy efficient refrigerator, as an example. And then you make a mental note that I need to go download that coupon, and the next thing you know, it's 2 days later, and you're trying to remember what you know you forgot, and you can't remember what the heck it is. So one of the benefits of mobile platforms is, of course, push notification, right? Putting the right level of information into the hands of the person that's holding that device, whether you own that device or not. It could be your husband's, your wife's, etc. But the reality is that because we're all so busy, none of us likes to spend time searching for information. I've seen websites, and this is across many industries, by the way. There are some standards in terms of presentation layer and how things should be structured and the technology that drives it and the integration to the information that is served up onto your screen. But the reality is that there's a lot of websites where there's some very key and very important pieces of information, but it's not very intuitive to where to go on the website to find it. That's one of the challenges we hear from customers when we survey them, is that they know their utility website has information, but they've tried in the past and couldn't get to it. And one of the reasons why they like the push notification is because it's delivered to them. By the way, text messaging is one of the more preferred pieces of communication. And one of the reasons why that's preferred is because it's a very simple piece of communication, and a lot of times it serves as a reminder. So as an example, a utility could send a reminder and say, you know, this is the last weekend we're going to be running this energy efficient refrigerator that you can use this $200 off coupon. And so if you're reminding your customers of how to take advantage of your programs and how to sign up for your plans, then customers value that. Another one we've seen is electric vehicle rates. There's all kinds of rates. Most electric vehicle users don't understand them unless we're talking about price. So customers are now learning that whenever they see anything related to a super saver rate plan and they've got an electric vehicle, they know that that's something that they're interested in, and they want to find out more about it, and they want to sign up for it.
Wonderful, Kris. And as you can see, this topic is so exciting that 2 hours and 37 minutes later, or an hour and 37 minutes later, I'm including the lunch that preceded this, we're still at it. So apologize for going past the regular time, and out of respect for the audience and their schedules, what I'd like to do is just give a final opportunity to both speakers to just say a word or two, and then I will bring this seminar to a close. So Kris?
Right, how about I go first? And I guess my closing comments would be the utility industry, as we have known it and grew up with it, is a changing industry. And there are all kinds of outside influencers that are putting pressure on the utilities to be more efficient, to be more responsive, to make our utility bills something that we actually understand. Believe it or not, that's still an issue with customers, is that they don't read them because they don't understand them. But as we move forward, it's important for us to know that utilities are challenged by various sources. Some they can control, some they cannot control. But in the end, when we look at what some of these pieces of innovation are that are technology related, we have to also understand that these things are designed to create a better utility industry for us all, whether we're a customer, whether we are a partner at the utility, or whether we are a utility themselves. So I look forward to continue working in this market because it's fun to work in an industry that is transforming.
Thank you, Kris. And for the final word from Satish.
Thanks, Erfan, and thanks, Kris. I think one of the things we've actually covered in this is really we've done our best to sort of reintroduce utilities, I think, to the audience, but I think it is important that utilities also, it's important to know that utilities are also looking to reintroduce themselves to the consumers. We truly at SUS see this as a win-win for both the utility and the consumer. There is potential for savings and better interaction, I think, for both sides of the equation. A lot of times it is really apparent why a utility wants to communicate with the consumer, and I think you alluded to that in the last question. It's not as apparent to the consumer what they gain out of the interaction. And a lot of what we've been doing, a lot of what Kris talked about in those discussions with 100,000 consumers and with all those utilities has been in addressing that, I think, is the key question. And that is the key question that I think we need to address, and we're looking forward to working more. We want to thank your audience. We want to thank you for putting this together, Erfan, as well as NTS for hosting this here.
Thank you, Satish. And if we could have a Willie Nelson song for this mobile platform, it would be On the Road Again, because that's where you would need this mobile platform the most. A couple of logistical notes. Next week on November, I'm still in denial that this year is coming to an end. December 18th, which will be a Tuesday, next Tuesday, at 5 p.m. Pacific, we're going to be reconvening at the IBM Innovation Center in Foster City, California, and the presenter will be from Nixon, N-I-K-S-U-N, and they are a vendor that provides network layer security, and the way they do it is by monitoring pipes all the way up to gigabit speeds, and they can do correlation in real time to identify anomalies and do both signature-based as well as signature-less identification of hacks. So we will see another innovative technology. What we are finding as I conclude this seminar is that we have some barriers to the plateau that we see in 10 years or 15 years from now. There are some technological barriers, some business process barriers, and some workforce training barriers. And through these innovative technologies and the advice that we are trying to bring from subject matter experts through this medium, we're trying to overcome those barriers. Because if we keep with business as usual, the pie is going to shrink. And a big reason why I have established this educational series is to remove the element of plausible deniability from our industry, saying, oh, I did not know that such a thing existed. So I'm removing that element. So in a court of law, it will not fly because there will be a webcast recording about it. So I'm really hoping that through participating in these forums and through the questions that you all ask, that we will get to that promised land on the other side. The promised land meaning that services in the energy sector will be delivered to meet the customer's need at the time, not 100 years ago kind of needs, but where they are today, fitting in with their lifestyles, maintaining their privacy, having the open standards to allow different vendors to operate, and at the same time have a viable economic model for a utility that has to face a jobless recovery and where employees have to do the work of 3 people. We need to have the latest, greatest technologies in place so that we can benefit from the efficiencies that they bring. Mobile platform is one example of that efficiency multiplier. So thank you very much for participating. At this time, I'm going to bring the seminar to a close. So I'm going to bring the recording to a halt, and we will see you next Tuesday at the IBM facility or online. You will be receiving the webcast recording and the presentation in PDF document form from the seminar today, as well as the announcement for next week. So have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week. Thank you very much.